culture? And I want to break that down because it's an empty question without context. Let's say, and I would love, if you could use Culture Amp as an example of this. Clearly, a culture is very different from seed stage to Series A, B, all the way up to E, where you are now.
Yeah.
And congratulations on the fundraise. That's a big one. So I would love to hear, whatever insights you can share, and I'm sure we can sit here for hours, but let's not. Let's try to draw out. My particular focus is fast growth companies that are somewhere between seed stage and Series B.
Yep.
Let's say so. For my target audience, if you will, I think the most interesting is what comes up in that period of crazy growth where oftentimes the entrepreneur may not have a corporate background. And they may be excellent at product market fit as a product person or excellent at sales, but they may be missing that piece of how do you deal with people in a non-sales capacity. So in that period, if we can just narrow things down between seed stage and let's say Series B, do you think, based on your experience of going Culture Amp and same for clients that have gone through those stages, is there a particular special sauce? What are the factors?
So there's no silver bullet. There's no perfect culture. We always say that a perfect culture is a cult. So that's not what you want. Sometimes it might feel like that when you're an early stage startup, but that's not what you want. What we do see, though, the characteristics of successful companies, and something that we strive for at Culture Amp and have strove for through that, is a few things. The first thing, and this is really why we built the platform, is a willingness to hold up a mirror and be accountable to what you see. So culture matters. Culture is the way things are done around here. And as organizations are growing, one of the challenges is that you often don't get successful as a startup if you're not willing to just go over the top of anything, like fight your way through. It's hustle, persistence, all of these things. But what you see often is people are like, I just want to win. I want to win at all costs. And what is interesting, not so much in the early stage, but as companies mature, and we've seen this play out time and time again, when you're willing to win at any cost, there is a time where people stop and go, the costs have got too high. You can't win at any cost. There is always a cost that is not worth winning for. And so often early when you're going from that, when you seed, you might be 2 people or 10 people, and the culture is just implicit, and you're just running around doing what you're doing. And then you're successful and you start to raise money, and then you start to hire more people, and you have to start being more explicit about who you are and what you are. And so what we see these good companies do is, first of all, they're willing to be accountable. And secondly, they think about, I like to say, brand as a promise to a customer. Culture is how you deliver that promise. So culture is not like, what do you want to be on a good day, or what does society tell you your company should be run like? It is, who do we need to be? And probably more importantly, who are we?
That's right.
Because it's already there. And it's this idea that you have to take away the inessential, and it's that core stuff. And you have to have the courage to say, this is what we are. This is what we believe in. This is how we operate. And then as you go from sort of A to B, the challenge is that you then have to work out how to open that up to be broader and to be more inclusive and to be able to bring people into the organization that you haven't had to date. Because early on, a monoculture can work because you can go really, really fast. But monocultures get brittle really quickly. And so what we see in organizations is that's a key stepping point where it's like, maybe you're all men. Who's the first female engineer you hire? Or when you stop hiring people from your school and start hiring people from a different background. Maybe you're fortunate enough to bring people together that have different backgrounds. How are you leveraging that? How are you increasing it? And so what companies that do this well do is they're very intentional. They think carefully about it. They're clear on what their values are. And their values are something that they're willing to hurt for. And then they sit down and they say, all right, given this mission and this worldview, how do we open ourselves up to people that we don't have experience with? How do we have them come in and help us expand this and turn it into something even bigger? Does that get to answering your question?
It does. I'd love to add a little color on this, just my own perspective. Essentially, culture is deed, right? So there's word, there's mission statement, values, and there's all that great stuff. But in the end, and I'm speaking as someone who's worked in God knows how many industries, 5 to be exact, every stage of startup, Fortune 500, in healthcare and finance, there's always something above the door. Right? We are, we have great integrity. Trust is everything. But the issue is that as a company grows, the distance between word and deed increases. Right. So the hardest part for, I think, a great culture, and I've been fortunate to work with companies as a consultant, companies that really care about leveraging what they've built. Maybe it's a family culture, maybe it's something that's very particular in their industry, but they want to take the best of what they've done and bring it to a bigger audience. So there's a lot of hiring once you raise a certain amount of money, etc. So the issue becomes when the distance between word and deed at the top, maybe it's very small, right? Maybe it's strategic, high level stuff. When it starts filtering down into the mid levels and especially the lower levels, that distance gets bigger and bigger because everyone's incentives are vastly different. Right? The people in the middle tend to want to keep the status quo because that's what their job is, right? So maybe a little bit of an increase, but mostly keep things stable. And then the analysts, the people at the bottom, they're full of energy, but they don't have direction. And people on top, they have their own factors. Maybe they have the need to cash out their shares, or maybe they have shareholder responsibilities or whatever else, right? So the hardest part is having, I think, someone in house. Actually, this is a great conversation. I'd love to kind of lead into this. I heard on Tim Ferriss, there's a book called Loon Shots. So the author, Safi Bakal, he brought up an excellent premise. He says, look, there has to be someone who's a chief incentives officer, someone whose job it is solely to make sure that the incentives of every employee are aligned with that of the team he or she is on, the project, and the company. There has to be that awareness. And because all the incentives are vastly different for people in the C-suite, so there's the founders, and they control whatever they control. Then you have the executives that come from maybe larger companies to stabilize the ship. Then you have middle management that came from a larger company to build something here, so have more responsibility. And then the analysts. Everyone has very, very different interests. And unless you really address that and talk about it openly and find a way to set things up in the right way, that distance will just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And instead of values above our door, it's, what factor of hypocrisy do we have here? So, that's something that I found, which is incredibly difficult. And there's no software that can do this magically. There's no way to measure this unless you come in from the outside and you have some, magic ability to gauge this. Good luck.
Yeah, and I think this problem is as old as humankind. I mean, if you think back on all the stories that get told through tribal communities and so on, these are encoded learnings. And a lot of what we have as myths are ways of teaching people how to be in the world, how to react with each other, how to survive, how to find water, how to do all these things. And so we're drawing upon the same background of storytelling. And so when you talk about that, like, how do you bridge the gap between word and deed? I mean, that's the heart of the struggle in every religion too.
That's right.
They have the word, and then there is the implied deed, and how do we match these two? 100%. And so what we see in organizations is, first of all, it has to be a living, breathing thing. It can't be just a word. And then it's something you have to talk about. And what we see when people do it well is you go, okay, if this is our value, what are the behaviors that drive that? What are the examples of that? What are the stories we can tell about when somebody lived that value? Story about somebody living a value in this company, that's much more meaningful than me telling you the value.
Absolutely.
And then a lot of the power, and we were talking about this on a panel last night with some heads of people here in New York, is also looking at the shadow side. So if value has a golden side, and then a value has a shadow side. And the shadow side is somebody supposedly living the value, but actually doing it in a way that is destructive or is not delivering against it. And there's no way of ferreting that out other than to sit down and talk about it and to name it and to create a culture where you can call that out and say, actually, this is not you living the value. This is you using the shadow side of the value. Right. So give you an example. One of our core value, our first value or culture amp, is have the courage to be vulnerable. It's a very powerful value. If you've read Brené Brown and a lot of that work, it's really leaning into this idea that if you want to create trust, you want to create a powerful culture, you actually have to be willing to be vulnerable in the first place. And so we lean into that, and it's a very big part of what we are. The shadow side of that value is people being vulnerable in a way that you are not ready for, or you haven't asked for. Like, being vulnerable doesn't mean I can come up and tell you some deep, dark secret of mine that's going to make your life very, very difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
Oversharing can be a shadow side of have the courage to be vulnerable, or people being felt like they're forced to be more vulnerable than they're ready to be. So as a company, we can be more explicit and more articulate about how these things play together. Yep. But going back to your point about incentives, what we also find is that for me is the heart, that's the soul, the poetry, all of that sort of stuff. The systems will also give rise to behavior. So it doesn't matter how pure the heart is. Absolutely. If the system that has been created is working against it, it will create maladaptive behaviors. Yep. And so compensation is a classic example of that. And it's actually one of the interesting things where we somewhat famously don't pay commission to salespeople for that exact reason, because people always talk about, well, we need to have incentive systems that align people's interests. Like, great. The thing they're not talking about is that when you align people's interests, you misalign them on everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And there's all these kind of weird secondary effects that happen when you say, hey, we're going to motivate this through financial instruments. We could talk for hours about that.
Yeah, bring in Daniel Pink and everybody else. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but it's funny to me that, like, even the stuff Daniel Pink's using research from the 50s. Yeah. We've known this for a very long time, but it's still considered orthodoxy to do it that way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So to go back to the coaching piece, so I'd love to hear your insights on the value measurable, ideally, of coaching, whether that's someone in-house or whether, let's say an external coach is brought in. So someone like myself through a platform that could be Go Coach, that could be Leg Up, Muse, any of these. Dime a dozen these days.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different levels at which we look at it and where we see effects in the software. Yep. The first one, which is not something that I was expecting, I hadn't really thought about it, but we do a program at Cultramp called Coaching for Everyone. So everybody, when they join the company at their 6-month mark again, and then again every year, they get access to a set of coaching sessions. And for me, it came from this idea that a lot of people give executives coaches. Yep. And I was like, well, why can't we give that to everybody? Why can't we give them access to that? And so it's there just to be almost like a transformative piece. That's right. And allow you to explore things. And I was talking to a few people that had gone through it, and I said, what was the value to you? And one of the bits that was really interesting is there were some people that were earlier in their career, and they said they'd been struggling with complexity and all the sorts of things that go when you early in your career trying to figure out how to make your way. Yep. And they found the coach was fantastic, not in telling them what to do, but just helping them deal with the ambiguity. That's right. And so, we think about it as maximizing the potential of our high performers, whereas a lot of the value is actually just giving people tools to cope with uncertainty, cope with complexity, to realize that it's okay, and you can get to the other side. So we see that piece of the value. The second piece of value we see is that a lot of what comes through in our data is that people that are engaged, or what leads to engagement inside organizations, is often around career development and people's perception that the place they're at is a place where they're growing. People want to grow. And to the extent that they can grow, they'll feel much more positive towards your organization than not. And coaching is a critical path in this because, first of all, a lot of people aren't really clear on where they want to go. And so they're like, I want to grow. But you're like, okay, well, where do you want to get to? I'm like, I don't know. What's available? What could I do? What should I do? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And so coaches are often ideal in helping people go on that journey and start to articulate where they want to go and start to create a map for that. Yep. And then to identify what the skills are. So we see in the research that people will call out and say, we really want training on feedback. It's really hard to give people hard feedback. Once again, we can give you content, we can show you videos, we can give you books. A skilled coach can teach you that in a way that is very hard to do in the platform. And so we see a kind of continuum through it, and we see them sort of everywhere the data pops up with an issue, a coach can help support it. One of the challenges that we see on the other side in the data is it's difficult to sustain the interventions that a lot of coaching places do. That's right. Particularly when coaching is done off-site. Yes. So that's a whole nother set of issues.
That it is. Excuse me. Yeah, you brought up a great point. In my experience as a coach, I've been doing this for a while. quite a few years. Lots of different companies, some more progressive, some less. Some people looking to stay and do better at their job. A lot of people looking to leave.
Yeah.
So there's always that kind of push and pull from companies. They're afraid that the coach is going to coach my employees out of my company.
Yeah.
And it's real.
Yes.
Right?
I actually said that when we set up our coaching program.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it internally, and I said, if we're going to do this program, we have to accept the fact that there'll come a time when someone chooses to leave because of the coaching.
That's right. Not everyone sees things this way.
That's okay. Like, that's the point of it.
That's the point. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think a lot of companies have that fear and they restrain the coaches from the full story.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I think a really good coach does is he or she says, look, your initial sort of incentive is to think, okay, what are my options, right? It's to go from a position of scarcity.
Yes.
Whereas your real story lies in a place where you're coming from a place of plenty. I have any number of options. I don't need to choose any but the one for me.
Yes.
Right. And that's based on internal factors, my story, what I've been through, what am I meant to do as a personality, et cetera. Right. So how do I not just leverage? Everything is about leverage, right? Just slow down with the leverage. First, go back and just understand again who you are. Where are you holding? Where did you come from? How have you grown? Take stock of all those things. There's lots of positives. Even if you've had a very up and down career and you've changed industries and everything looks like it's everything is upside down. Even in those quote unquote negative data points, there's quite a lot of information. And there's so much to learn just from that and from that vulnerability. You're right that it's very hard to sustain, right? Because most companies say, oh, okay, here's 5 sessions or 10 sessions, and then okay, adios amigo. And that's what I found. So through these various platforms, companies are very apt to extend the gesture, because it's a very nice gesture. It's a great employee perk, etc. And it can be transformative until it's not, right? Because you're back to the grind. You have your sort of constraints from management, from your performance review, and
the systems haven't changed, and so it's very hard with new behavior to produce a different outcome.
So my philosophy, just to standing on one foot, is that as the head of the company or someone who's the chief HR officer, you have to accept the fact that top talent will be here for a limited time. They are probably here, if we're talking about millennials in their mid-career, probably 2 to 3 years. Even in a Google and a Facebook and Salesforce, those are the average numbers. And ironically, they haven't changed much since Gen X and Boomers were at the same stage in their career.
That's because the Gen thing's a load of bollocks. But
that's right, it is exactly right. I talk a lot about that in my book. It's very, very similar.
It's a cohort effect.
It's a cohort effect, exactly. But also, millennials, we want everything faster. We don't have any patience. We're behind. Anyway, separate subject, different day. I would love to shift the conversation a bit. I noticed that you just released something called the Diversity and Inclusion Starter Kit. I'm really curious to delve into this. Just speaking very bluntly, I know there's a lot of money thrown at this, although maybe not enough. A lot of talent that goes into this space. And there's a lot of excitement, right? Because companies, through lawsuit or otherwise, are learning that this is important for a lot of people. They don't have opportunities to work for the great companies because they can't get in. And even if they're in, they're not taken seriously, or they're not, their voices are not really heard. So a lot of fluff around the subject, a lot of sort of politically correct conversations that often, if you look at the data, from what I've seen, and I want to hear from your data because that's even a lot more robust, what is there in terms of practices that you can implement, not just to bring in diverse voices and people that look different from different schools? I know there's this kind of expat effect in your company as well, which I think is a very interesting layer. How do you do that when you do it effectively? So you, meaning you in Culture Amp, and also your clients. I would love to hear your insights on that.
I think the first thing you realize when you commit yourself to building a more diverse, more inclusive organization, one that seeks equity, seeks belonging for everyone, is there's no finish line. And the more you get into it, the more you realize how many things need to be fixed, how many things need to change.
Mm-hmm.
The way we've had the fortune to work with a lot of great people in this space over the last few years, and as you said, I think there's become a real movement where people have realized that this stuff matters.
Yep.
And, there's data to support it. My personal take on it is we go about it the wrong way. Everyone's like, show me the data that proves that diverse teams are better. I'm like, actually, show me the data that shows non-diverse teams are better. There is none, so why build them?
That's right.
Like, we live in a diverse world. I think what we've learned and what we've seen is that, and I think it was actually Dom Price from Atlassian was on our stage at Culture Fest Global, and he quoted somebody else, but the line that he used, which I loved, was, if you're going to spend $1 on diversity, reserve $2 for inclusion, or don't even bother spending it.
Okay.
Because it's like, we need to start by creating a space which is inclusive of people wherever they're coming from, if we're going to have any success. And that is challenging because it challenges a lot of things about how we are human, and we have to teach ourselves new ways of being and new things, but it also connects with something that is very human too. So it's both hard and also easy in the same way. And so what we've seen as actual practices that organizations have used to do this well is, first of all, opening up that conversation. And when you open up that conversation, you have to open up with an appreciation that it's not always perfect. So Stephen Huang is he was our head of D&I, or is our head of D&I's rotating role. He's about to rotate out of that role. And the thing he said to me when he took the role, so I asked him, what do you need me to commit to? And he said, he talked about some things. Then he said, my goal while I'm in this role is to help everyone at Culture Amp to understand how D&I is important to them.
That's right.
And to help them understand that it's okay to be wrong. And I was talking to a woman by the name of Lily Zhang, who's written some really interesting work looking at the effects on transgender people in San Francisco and the tech industry and some of the trauma that they go through. And she and I were talking, and I said to her, look, this stuff is really hard. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I sometimes worry about this and that. Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and she said something that I loved, where she said, there is a right way to be wrong and a wrong way to be wrong.
That's such
such good advice.
Such a saying for our times. If only more people would listen.
Yeah. So the first practice that we see that works is opening up space to allow people to say the wrong thing, and saying to people, you still have to be okay to being called out. Like, take gender pronouns. I saw this wonderful presentation where somebody was talking about like what to do when you mess it up, and you can't just ignore it and say, well, that's a dumb thing, I don't want to do it. It is really important to people. You then have to actually apologize for it, but you can learn from the journey. You don't have to be pilloried for getting it wrong. Like, everybody starts as a novice at some point. Just admit you're a mistake and go learn about it and, get educated. And so this whole process, and whether it's on gender, whether it's on race, there is so much to learn, and it's so hard for us to not feel defensive. You see this a lot where, the cis white men are sitting there saying, hey, we're, whatever. But at the end of the day, the thing we need to understand is that it is possible, and I say this as a classic example of compound privilege in my role, I can both be the problem and be part of the solution. And neither forces the other not to be true. And so we did this, I got listed as, top CEOs as voted by women on one of those strange websites.
Right.
So top 50. And so it's like, that's great. It's nice that happened. But 46 of the 50 CEOs were men. So the problem is still a problem until that's like 25. And so one of the best things I can do is not get on that list, because there are other women that are out there doing a better job than me. But I can still help get to that point, and I can do it by being more open, by learning.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, so I think for me, the biggest practice that we see is just a willingness to try, a willingness to be wrong, a willingness to open up that conversation, and then it goes back to stories. So one of the most powerful things that happened here at Culture Amp was we ran our own diversity inclusion survey, and so this starter kit that we rolled out is our full platform, all the survey items. It's all our analytics. It's all of our action items. It's everything to help people go on this journey for free, because we care about this problem. And we ran our own version of it, and we're looking at our inclusion results. And there were certain groups that were struggling with belonging more than others. And so Stephen arranged a meeting where he reached out to some people that were in those groups. And he said to them, look, you can choose or not, but I'd love you to come in and do this group. You choose which senior leaders you want to come in and talk to you. And then you have 5 minutes to tell your story. With no right of reply. So the senior executive can't do a right of reply. They're just there to listen. And so I was one of the people that was invited in, and I got to listen to these stories, and they were so powerful because they were stories of identity and their worldview and what's got to them being in this position.
Yep.
You can't walk out of that room and not feel compelled to try and build a better world of work and a place that's more diverse and more inclusive. So these are the practices that we see work. And of course, there's lots of other stuff, and there's lots of things you can be trained to do, and bias and all of this sort of stuff. But for me, they're the things that really stand out.
It's just a quick note. A friend of mine, he's from Nigeria, and he's lived all over the world, and he's a very interesting guy. He's found himself in a lot of different places, but for a long time he didn't kind of find his place. And then he just published a book recently. It's called "Use Your Difference to Make a Difference." Tayo Roxon.
Okay, cool.
And he speaks a lot on the subject, does consulting, etc. But for me, that's a much more sort of positive message. Instead of saying, let's go club
whoever
club those, for not, but let's actually take the human stories of difference and use them in a positive way. That's not all about political correctness.
Yes.
Right? Again, going back to this idea of value in the story. So something interesting on the subject. Admittedly, I'm not anything like an expert. I'm really interested in what actually works, right? Because it's great to hire people that look different and sound different, but if you don't account for their voices and their stories and what they have to tell, you're actually missing out on massive value, I think, for your company and for your culture. So,
yeah, and it's how people show up at work. It's neurodiversity. It's all of these different things that people are living with. Increasingly, we're finding in the workplace, we need to have an attitude to how we support mental well-being.
That's right.
For a very long time, the world in business was, I hope I don't have somebody that has depression or suffers from anxiety because that's really painful.
Yep.
And now I think people are starting to realize, well, you can hope that as much as you want, but pretty much everybody's got something. And we need to accept this, and we actually need to lean into it and open a space. And the workplace can be a place to support those people. And I think that's a positive change, but it's a really hard one for a lot of organizations, and people are sort of floundering with how to deal with that responsibility. And there's also, on the other side of that, we're seeing the thing that just because you're the CEO, or just because you're a manager, you can't deal with everything. There are people that are going to have clinical issues that you are not equipped or skilled to deal with. And the worst thing in the world is for you to go read, a great management book and then sit down with somebody who's suffering from anxiety and say, all right, I'm going to use this method on you and I'm going to get a result. It's like, this is a terrible idea.
Lab rat, welcome, yes.
Yeah, so how do we teach people how to identify different issues and how to help that person get whatever it is that they need? These are the questions of our time.
That's right. By the way, I heard, just a very quick aside, I heard recently, I met a CEO, he runs a software company basically, but the interesting part is that he only hires autistic people
on the
coders,
spectrum, yeah.
And they're all remote. And it's a, when I heard this concept, it just completely shook me to my core. I'm like, this is at once brilliant and completely crazy. How did you manage to pull this off? And he said, okay, one of the things we have to do is, it's for us, that's our insurance. We have every employee fill out kind of a book, more or less a book that tells other people how to deal with them. What is their style of communication?
User manual, yeah.
Yeah, and I just
we do that at Culture Amp, so everyone here writes a user manual.
That's
but we're not all on the spectrum.
that would be tough.
Although I think some people probably are, but
It's always
Yeah, no, I think, and that's a great example. That we had a fantastic speaker once again at our Culture Fest Global. We had a panel on diversity and inclusion, and we brought people with different backgrounds. And there was a person talking about neurodiversity and how we better set up our organizations to support those people. And then one of the other people that was speaking, he was talking about the thing that I think is actually one of the most pernicious problems, which is social status. Like, we talk about diversity, that's often the area where we have the least diversity in our organizations. We're not crossing social divides. And it's amazing how resilient is the wrong word, but how stubborn those things can be to change.
Well, that's also coming out of university. Those numbers from top schools are not always encouraging. They're getting worse with the years.
Yeah.
So.
And part of that is anthropology, politics, all of these things.
Policies are not always the best. But anyway, so thank you. That's a really, really valuable discussion, I think, that hasn't had a lot. So let's just to wrap up. in terms of sort of practical takeaways, again, thinking about early stage founders, perhaps someone who's raised a seed round or Series A or B, what would you give as advice for people that are early in building their companies, building their cultures, really getting a feel for the human side of the business? What advice would you give? Again, this could be anecdotal, this could be from your data. Anything is more than welcome.
Wow, where do I start?
That's right.
Given the topic we just had, I'll throw something out that was really interesting to me. So there's a very specific thing, which was if you read books, which a lot of people in startups do, I read a lot, and so I got asked by the team to give my list of books that had influenced me. So here's my top 50 books that have influenced me as an entrepreneur. And then one of the people on my team asked me a very humbling question where she said, how many of those books were written by women? And so what was interesting is of 50 books, there were 46 written by men. Interestingly, I'd already chosen my top 5, and 3 of the top 5 were written by women. But part of it is there's a lot of management books. And if you go back 20 years, all the management books were written by the same 5 white men. So there's like a pretty small thing. But it got me thinking that early on in your journey, it's really good to sit down, and whether it's websites you read, whether it's books you read, podcasts you listen to, just ask yourself, where are all those people coming from? And can you add just a little bit more diversity into where that thought is coming from? For me, a lot of it is it's a lot of IO psychology is normed on Western psychology.
Yes, it is.
Can we listen to people out of Europe, out of Asia, out of other places, out of Africa that will give us new ideas? And the earlier you do that, the better, because it will influence your thinking. So that's one takeaway for everybody. Like, write down your top 50 books. And now I've told you what you're looking for. You're going to come up with other ones, but you'll realize it's really hard because you haven't been exposed to it. I think I would start with values, because I think values are the bedrock of everything. But the view I would give people is values are not what you want to be on a good day. Values are what you're willing to hurt for. They're what you're willing to hurt for every day. And so what you do is you sit down with your founders, or you sit down with your early team, and you ask yourself, what are the things we believe in? What are the things we're willing to lose for? Like, if it comes down to walking away from the next term sheet, or it comes down to not winning a particular customer, whatever it might be, why? What matters to you? And you've got to go below the surface. When people like respect or integrity, it's fine. But what does that mean to you? And why is that important? Because what you're looking for is to help start as early as you can, define a culture that is both distinct and individual. And the effect that you want on people is you want it to make people want to be a better version of themselves.
Yes.
So they have their own values. They look at your culture and they go, something about the company you're describing to me makes me want to be the person I want to be. I'm going to come work for you. So once again, the sooner you start having that conversation, the better. And just allow yourself to, circle around it and talk about it. The actual words themselves will come. It's the concepts that you have to get right.
Emphatic yes. I wanted to ask you 2 questions. I don't know, we might be running out of time here.
2 more minutes?
I can run slightly over if I have to.
Okay, great.
This just comes to mind. I don't know, I'm not a financial forecaster or economist here, but there will be a recession at some point.
Yes.
When you have a recession, a lot of things that are, fluffy and very progressive tend to take a backseat because shareholder responsibility.
Yep.
We have to, cauterize the wounds and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. So when the recession comes, where will culture sit? Will it still continue blooming as a top priority for companies, or will it take a backseat? What do you think?
2 thoughts. I think it'll be more important. And the 2 thoughts I have, which are, first of all, why care? Why invest in people, right? Why do it at all? One of the ways I think about it is that if you're in this for the long haul, at some point something bad is going to happen. Yeah. Your industry's going to change. Technology's you're going to lose your major client, whatever it is. Why invest in people? Because at some point you're going to need your people to invest in you. And you can't make that up later. And that's what this is about. Like, so when we go into a recession, there's a whole bunch of companies out there at the moment where their motive operandus, we pay top of the market, we hire rock stars and all this sort of stuff. When the music stops, people aren't working for that anymore because that stuff's not available.
Correct. Yeah.
People are sitting down going, this is hard for everyone. I might not get a pay rise for 2 years because we're not winning in the market. We're losing customers. We're going backwards. We have declining headcount. That's when the investment in all the non-monetary stuff really pays off because people are like, actually, this is work I believe in. This is a place I want to be. This is a place where I'm treated with respect. this is a place where I can be the person that I want to be. And so culture is critically important now to be ready for that. And then when it happens, the companies that will succeed are the companies that work out how to not get more from their people, but able to do more with the people they have, because they're not going to be able to throw money at things.
It's a great insight.
Yeah, we'll see certain things change, and some of the perks that are considered to be standard now won't be standard tomorrow. But the core of creating a mission and a vision that people believe in, having values that matter, that won't go away.
I tend to agree with you. Terrific. Didier, thank you so much for your time. It's really a pleasure to have this conversation, a wide range of subjects. Really, thank you.
My pleasure. This is fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yuri.